I chose this one because I've loved horses my entire life. I've ridden horses my entire life. I've primarily done Western type events like barrel racing. I used to rope cattle for a long time. I just thought it was a very interesting type of topic to choose because a big problem in the horse industry is comparing English and Western disciplines and saying, this horse isn't behaving because you're training him in English or you're training him in Western. And that's usually a problem between horsemen. So, a brief background about horses, some common general stuff. Horses have been an essential part of human history since forever. They evolved from an ancient species. They're primarily used for transportation. Even today, people ride horses primarily for fun, but back in the day, it was used for farming, pulling plows, and things like that. And even in battle, horses were an important part of the Civil War, and without them, we wouldn't have things like the cavalry. We wouldn't have won battles because of them. They just are a really important part of our history as humans. So it's important to learn more about them because it relates to human history as well. Well, with time, different riding styles developed as humans began relying on them more for transportation than farming. Nowadays, we only use them for riding. I don't see many people using horses as, farming tools except to ride or use in events and things like that. That's primarily used for cows if it's used in less developed countries. Western riding is most associated with the American cowboy. When you think about a cowboy, you always think about that beautiful quarter horse, that amazing cowboy hat, that saddle. It's popularized by movies. Things like Bonanza had cowboys on horses all the time. So usually when you think of a cowboy, you think Western. When you think of Western, you think horse. English is also a popular style. Usually proper. When you see it in media, it's like British people on them, usually. So why should we learn about the topic? It can provide insight on how we communicate with horses. When we ride, when we see signs of stress, for researchers, it can show how different disciplines influence animal behavior. We should learn about this topic, especially as animal handlers, because when we ride, we can see signs of stress on our horses that we should be able to pick up on and stop whatever we're doing to stop that discomfort, that stress, and maybe even it's related to the discipline that you're using. So we kind of go through that in this presentation here and see if discipline is a direct consequence of animal behavior. Here's a picture of horse transport. You usually see that in the 19th century, horses being used to transport carts and things like that. They're just very important, used for cargo, things like that. So Western relies heavily on quarter horses. I've mentioned that before. Western relies on energy and hard labor. Still today, you go to places like Montana and you see that Western horses are very much used for hard labor, and without them we wouldn't have things like hamburgers, because Western horses are used for things like cattle and stuff like that. So Western is an important part of society. That's why we need to rely on it as well. English is more subtle. It's still important though, because a lot of people learn horse riding from English directly, because the English saddle provides a better understanding of balance. So I also think English is important. I'm not trying to say that English is not important. I think it's very important for the rider to understand things like leg cues, listening to your horse's body signals, because you're so close to that horse when you're on an English saddle. So, as I said, horses typically behave by responding to rein and leg cues from the rider. It can go from different gaits, from cantering, trotting, and walking with each gait, depending on rein pressure and rider leg pressure. So, for example, when your reins are turning, you can use a turn to horse, or you can use the reins to stop your horse, and you can use rider leg pressure to direct the horse in the direction to which you want to go. Alright. Here's a few more examples of different types of riding. You can see with English, it's a definite horse rider experience because you're so close. You're basically bareback. So the first study I used is assessment of ridden horse behavior. It was developed by Nottingham Trent University. So basically the method is the study of horses and how they react to being ridden in general. The study mentions how dressage and Western riding depends on movements from the rider. So the type of discipline depends on the type of rider you are. But, however, there is an argument that basic requirements of all equestrian should be reached based on animal welfare. Both disciplines require different skills, but behavior of the horse depends on behavior of the rider. That's pretty common hypothesis that they're making there. The study aims to view behavior, signs of comfort when being ridden. So basically, they just looked at two different types of discipline, dressage and Western, and viewed their behavior signals to see how comfortable they were when being ridden. So what's their hypothesis? The reflection of horse behavior is based on mental status of the animal. That's the hypothesis they made and what they're going to assess. So, like I said, despite major differences between disciplines, agreements in all equestrian sports must be made for animal welfare. So, it mentions how behavior should indicate mental status, and with dressage, especially, the discipline relies on the horse being in harmony and light on their feet. That's a big thing in dressage, basically not being able to see at all what you're doing on that horse. So, whereas submission is very important and judged heavily. That's why behavior is important in this, because submission is a very big key in dressage. So from age 5 to 6, the qualities of behavior include natural attitude, attentiveness, and mental suppleness. And undesired traits in dressage horse would be head positioning and avoiding the rider's rein cues. Also, for example, in dressage, age begins around 5 to 6 and includes temperament. We mentioned that. Let's see. So they also studied behavior regarding to pain in the horse. English and Western horses have different expectations for movement and cue responses. Ridden horses, especially those that are in lesson type situations, like a lesson horse, have signs of pain that is mistaken for laziness. For example, stopping in the middle of the arena or whatever, and you are kicking their abdomen and they just don't do anything. You think that they're being lazy, but it's actually a response to pain. So rigid stance, reluctant to move, pain anywhere in the horse is regarding to that. And here is the types of equipment that belongs on an English horse, and it can definitely be caused from equipment as well. So, let's see. Here's an example of Western tack. You can see the differences between English. English has that little tiny saddle, reins on both sides. Meanwhile, as Western has one hand primarily used in riding. So it also says that not performing does not always mean pain, but usually is done when the skill of the rider is not very good. So basically the study is saying that skill of the rider is very important. It doesn't matter what discipline it is. If this horse is not doing well, you might need to consider yourself and see if you're doing anything wrong. So here's some general display of pain measures from the study. You can see that there are some common displays of pain, restlessness, lowered head, fixed stare, clenched jaw. These are lots of indications of pain, but maybe someone would look at it and think, oh, okay, well, my horse is just being bad. I'm going to punish him for it. But actually, it's just because they're in pain. So it's very important to really study your horse no matter what discipline you're in and see what is actually relating to pain. So the psychological mental state of a horse is very important too. When you're riding, it doesn't matter what kind of discipline you're doing. Emotional response of the horse cannot be guaranteed. You cannot guarantee how a horse is going to respond to a type of behavior that you're displaying. In this type of study, heart rate and heart rate variability was studied during activities, and as well as cortisol released during training activities in both disciplines. Heart rate would increase when mounted by a rider in both disciplines. So basically that's saying when anybody would come on top of the horse, mount the horse, that their heart rate would increase, meaning that they knew what was coming. They knew that they're going to get ridden. So this happened in Western and English too. So anytime that a person would mount that horse, they knew that they were about to get ridden. Western plays a big role in this part of the study. Plasma cortisol was studied in these Western events, particularly pole bending and barrel racing. Increased heart rate of anticipation of the start of the event, because during barrel racing, it's kind of a high-paced fight or flight event. Pole bending is the same way. They know that they're about to go into a big high-stress event, and they know that their heart rate is going to increase. Whereas in English, there wouldn't be as big as a fight or flight emotion, because English is kind of things like dressage is kind of a softer, less stress-heavy type of discipline. But Western, it's the crowd, they're all screaming. It's usually at a rodeo. It's really loud there. And dressage is kind of quiet, subtle. So there can definitely be a role in the fact of plasma cortisol, because we're seeing that big difference there. So my conclusion of the study is that in equestrian sports, horse performance in both disciplines require a mental status of the horse. So it doesn't matter what discipline you're doing, in my opinion, especially in the opinion of the people who made this study, that the horse will perform based on the mental status that it's in. So if the horse is in pain all the time, it's going to perform bad. So it affects both welfare and competition performance. Accurate reading of behavioral signs must be evaluated for every rider, regardless of discipline, to improve mental status of horse, and there are lots of methods to observing results. So the problem with this is that it showed major problems without clear results, and everyone scored differently, making it hard to draw conclusions. I think that in this study, they definitely showed a lot of problems, but they focused on dressage a lot. They didn't really come to an accurate conclusion. All they did was say that we need to interpret behavioral signs a lot better going forward when you're riding horses. Aggression should be related to health problems. Maybe we should take better care of our horses, is basically what it's saying, which didn't really answer a lot of my questions about it, but it did show things like behavior based on pain. Well, the second study I did was effective discipline versus dressage on skill level and learning discomfort of riding horses. This was one that was directly in effect of both disciplines. So the hypothesis of the study is that Western ridden horses would show faster learning of the same riding task and less discomfort behavior compared to English ridden horses, because of the better consideration of learning theory. So basically it's saying that Western horses would be faster learning and would have less discomfort in their behavior than English dressage horses. So this is based on application of rein pressure, which is a major thing in Western riding, definitely. It's not in dressage, because in dressage you're basically holding both hands. You're not applying very much rein pressure. And we need to see if the horse gives a correct response to negative reinforcement. So, we need to ask, what was tested in this experiment? 24 horses, 13 dressage, and 11 western, with different skill levels, ridden with elements and patterns from Western Trail and dressage. Gates, transitions, riding through a gate, and they're only given 20 minutes to complete the pattern. What was measured? The amount of time to complete it, hoof prints, heart rate, rein tension, and finally, overall behavior of the horses. So this was a mixed model analysis, and all those things were scored, basically to see if there's a difference between riding styles and behavior of the horse, patterns, and skill level. This is an example of reining. The hand moves to the side, lifting the bit, the horse will turn. Horses turn from the inside, so rein pressure directly affects the way your horse is going to go. Results. So the results were pretty simple. They improved from first to second rides in both disciplines. Increased scores meant less aversion to bad behaviors. Scores were higher with Western horses with moving items. So, for instance, the person was holding something in their hand or having to open a gate. The scores were definitely higher. There was no vast difference in heart rate or moving from their path. So both horses managed to stay on their path that they were given in the pattern in this study. Rider skill made the biggest difference is something that we saw both in the other study and this study too, showing that discipline has no effect on horse performance and behavior because rather than skill level, riding style has no impact on horse performance. Only the rider's skill level has impact because the rider is controlling the horse in this instance. So, Western trained horses, dressage trained horses, no significant differences. So that p-value is less than 0.1. Yeah. So what is my conclusion? Discipline makes little difference in behavior of a horse. It all depends how a human treats them. If you treat your horse bad, no matter what discipline you're doing, it's still gonna be bad. So you can abuse a horse in any way, even if you're English, even if you're Western. I've seen it happen in both disciplines. Second study definitely could have done more significant tests rather than patterns. They only tested heart rate, things like that. They didn't do very many tests. They just did one singular test and tested everything. So, for horse-related careers, people should focus on comfort of the horse when training rather than blaming on discipline. That's my takeaway from both these studies. I just don't think that we should be focusing our time on saying, oh, this horse is bad because he's English. No, we should focus on comfort of the horse when training rather than blaming on discipline, and you yourself can choose which one you'd like better.